Takumi has been summoned to another world and finds himself standing before the goddess Nolan, but the first thing she does is sincerely apologize because this was all a huge mistake. She explains that when a summoning spell is activated, it randomly selects a bunch of losers from Earth to be isekai'd. But Takumi's life was actually going pretty well, so he was meant to be excluded from the summoning. However, an error occurred causing him to be dragged here alone with all the others. And it's all because the Holy Sidonia Empire decided to recklessly activate the summoning spell. Since Takumi was never meant to be summoned, Nolan brought him up here instead, while all the other summoned heroes went straight to Sidonia. Takumi asks her if she can just send him back to Earth since he was summoned by mistake, but unfortunately, she can't do that. She was so pissed off at Sidonia for using the forbidden summoning spell that she immediately patched it out of this world's magic laws, so no one can move between worlds anymore. And that means Takumi is stuck here permanently. The process also kinda killed him, so there's that too. Takumi starts freaking out upon realizing that he's a disembodied ghost, but only tells him he doesn't have to worry because she has a plan. She can't send him back to Earth, but she can give him a new body and have him become a citizen of this world instead. And as an apology, since this is partially her fault, she offers to grant him her blessing to make his life easier. Takumi doesn't really have much of a choice, so he agrees to be reborn into this world, and Nolan is glad to hear that because it makes this a lot easier for her. She tells him to open his status screen to check out the new life he will have, and when Takumi does, he finds out that Nolan is planning to give him a 17-year-old body, even though he's 40. Nolan tells him not to bother with the minor details, and more importantly, he still needs to pick out his job. She tells him that there are two main classes for jobs, so if Takumi wants something more combat-focused, he can pick things like swordsman, knight, or hunter. But if that doesn't appeal to him, then he could always pick one of the production jobs instead. Takumi doesn't like the idea of having to fight, so he decides to go with a production job after all. Nolan then proceeds to implant the job in his soul, along with a bunch of other bonus blessings, and sends him on his way, completely forgetting to give him a tutorial. Takumi crash lands in the middle of a forest, and after finally picking himself off the ground, he sees his reflection in the river and realizes that he really has become a different person, and he doesn't have arthritis anymore. He decides to make the best of his new life and goes to look in the bag Nolan dropped off with him to see what's inside. In the bag, he finds some food rations and some money, so it looks like he doesn't have to worry about starving for now. He then takes a look at his status screen, and it looks like Nolan really hooked him up with all the useful skills he could ever need. He even has elemental magic, so he decides to try that out first to see if he can really use it. He opens his hand and calls out water ball, and just like that, a water ball forms in his hand. The other elements work the same way, so Takumi is easily able to use them on his first try, but now he has figured out how his magic works. He has to start thinking about his next move and decides to head for the nearest village. While walking, Takumi comes across a stick in the middle of the path, and it looks like a really nice stick, so he uses his appraisal skill to scan it and finds out that this is trank wood. It's gotten from the trade monster, and it is really useful for making things like magic staves and spears, so Takumi decides to put his modeling skill to the test and uses it on the wood to create a spear. Since the wood works so well, Takumi decides to scan around to see if there are any other useful plants nearby, and he finds a ton of them, so he spends the next hour picking them. But now he doesn't know what to do with all these. They definitely won't fit in his bag, so he might have to leave them behind, but then Takumi remembers that he has an item box skill, so he uses it to store all the plants. Just then, he hears someone scream, and a few moments later, he sees a little girl run out of the bushes. The little girl comes to him for help because there's a monster chasing after her, and when Takumi turns to see what kind of monster it is, he finds a massive horned rabbit. The rabbit charges at him and nearly impales Takumi, but at the last second, he freaks out and accidentally stabs the rabbit in the head, killing it instantly. He is shocked that a beginner like him was able to win against a monster like that, so he assumes it must be because of Nolan's blessing, but Nolan had nothing to do with it. It was just dumb luck. As a result of his fight, Takumi earns the job title of warrior, but he's not happy about it since he was hoping to avoid fighting altogether. But that's not really important right now since he still has to check if the little girl is alright. Molly says she's fine and explains that she was out here picking herbs, but she accidentally got too far from the board village and ended up getting attacked. Upon hearing her mention a village, Takumi gets excited and asks her if it's alright for him to come to the village. Molly tells him she'll show the way, but before that, she asks if he's planning on taking that rabbit with him since their meat is really tasty. Takumi realizes it would be a waste to leave it here, so he stuffs the rabbit in his item box, but immediately after doing so, he realizes that he just did that in front of Molly even though he was planning to keep his item box skill a secret. Well, there's nothing he can do about it now, so he and Molly start walking over to the village. And at the same time, the other people who got summoned have just arrived in the Empire of Sidonia, and they are incredibly confused about what's going on. None of them are hurt, but they have no idea where they are, and all of a sudden, they hear someone call out to them as heroes. A woman approaches and tells them that they are no longer in their original world, and that they have been summoned to use their power as heroes to save this world. She introduces herself to them as the Empress of the Sidonia Empire, Elizabeth, and one look at her face makes the kids realize that she's shady as hell. Just then, Akane's unique skill kicks in, and it seems Nolan granted her the blessing of revelation, so if she follows her gut instinct, she will naturally arrive at the right answer. And right now, Akane's gut is telling her that Elizabeth is a backstabbing bitch, so she can't be trusted. Meanwhile, Takumi has arrived in the bored village, and Molly's parents come out to thank him for saving their daughter. Molly's dad introduces himself as Banga, and his wife over here is Martha. They think Takumi is a really responsible guy to have traveled so far on his own, and on that note, Takumi asks them if it would be alright for him to stay in this village for a while since he has nowhere else to go. They tell him he is welcome to stay, but unfortunately, they don't have an inn in the village, so there's nowhere for him to stay right now. But they could always just build him a house though. All the villagers gather around an empty plot of land and are about to begin work, but Takumi wants to make himself at least somewhat useful, so he uses his earth magic to flatten the ground for the foundation. This is the first time he has used magic on such a wide scale, so he almost passes out from mana depletion. The villagers are all amazed that Takumi can use earth magic so easily, so Takumi asks if they think he just did something strange, but they tell him not to worry about it. Since he has taken care of the foundation, the rest of them get to work assembling his house for him. And by the next morning, Takumi's house has been completed. Thanks to his carpentry, blacksmithing, and sewing skills, Takumi was able to make a good set of furniture for himself. But there's something else he's been meaning to try out. He got a bunch of ores from the village blacksmith, boron, so he wants to try using alchemy to extract the metal. He's got iron ore, silver ore, copper ore, and even some magic iron ore, so he starts off with the iron and tries to make an iron ingot from it. Normally this would require a large furnace and hours of work, but with Takumi's alchemy, he can do it all at once, but it drains a ton of his mana in the process. His first attempt at ore extraction was successful, and Takumi is really excited, so he wants to keep extracting as much as possible so he can make stuff with it later. A couple of hours have gone by, so Molly comes over to Takumi's house to bring him some dinner, but when she opens the door, she is shocked to find him passed out on the floor looking like he's been sucked dry. Takumi had overdone it with the ore extraction and nearly died from mana depletion, but Martha and Banga gave him a recovery potion, so he's alright now and can keep practicing his alchemy, although they made him promise not to overwork himself anymore. Over time, Takumi extracted a bunch of iron, copper, and even a bit of gold too, so he was able to make a ton of useful tools with them. And once he was done with alchemy practice, he would spend time with Boron in the forge learning how to make all kinds of weapons. The blade turns out really well, and once Boron is done making the sheath, it will be complete. Takumi's blacksmithing skill is now level 40, so he's done practicing that for now and decides to move on to something else. He goes over to Banga and asks if he can borrow a couple of potions, and Banga has no problem lending him some, but all the potions are basic, so he won't get much use out of them. Takumi tells him that that's fine since all he needs is a template for what a potion should look like. He's thinking of making some potions of his own with all those herbs he gathered in the forest, and Banga is happy to support Takumi in any way he can, so he offers to buy some potions from him if he completes the first batch. Takumi thanks Banga, and after he gets the basic potion, he starts working on his own version. He makes it with some hilcock leaves and water, and when he's done, he puts it in a glass jar so he can compare it to the one he got from Banga. Both of them are blue, but the one Takumi made is notably more blue than the one he got from Banga, plus it seems to have magic in it, but Takumi isn't sure if this is a success or not. He's going to have to test the potion himself to make sure it isn't harmful, but he doesn't want to end up dying if it turns out to be poisonous, so he decides to build up some poison tolerance, and the best way for him to do that is to eat whatever this is until he's about to die, and then use healing magic to cure himself. He's been doing this for a couple of hours now, and he feels like absolute shit. On the bright side, curing himself so much has granted him the purification skill, and that's definitely going to come in handy at some point. As Takumi is getting back to his feet, he hears a noise behind him and finds a massive boar staring him down. The boar clearly isn't friendly, so Takumi grabs his spear and gets ready to defend himself, but as the boar charges at him and he tries to use the spear, it shatters on contact, leaving the boar unharmed and Takumi without a weapon. He tries to use all the magic he has available to him, but none of them do any damage to the boar, so he's starting to panic here. And just when he thought things couldn't get any worse, he notices a poison spider behind him, and it looks like it's getting ready to attack, so Takumi is completely cornered. However, instead of attacking him, the spider attacks the boar instead, causing it to miss Takumi. But the boar is still coming for him, so he has to think of something fast. So far, all of his physical attacks have failed, but there's still one thing he hasn't tried yet. As the boar charges at him again, he jumps into the air, and at the moment of contact, he uses his alchemy skill on the boar's head and breaks it down. Thanks to his quick thinking, he managed to survive, and now that he's safe, he decides to go check on the spider since it helped him out earlier. The spider is in really poor shape after it got hit by the boar. He decides to heal it so it doesn't die, and afterwards, he gets up so he can return to the village, but then he receives a notification telling him that he has successfully tamed the spider. He didn't realize it was even possible to take a spider, but he's hesitant to take it with him since the spider is considered a dangerous monster. However, the spider hits him with the cutesy eyes, so he decides to accept it as his pet anyway, and to make it official, he names her Maple. A little while later, Takumi returns to the village and shows everyone the giant boar he killed. They are all amazed that he could defeat something like that, but even more so that he managed to tame a poisonous spider since no one has ever managed to do that before. That aside, Takumi suggests that they all share the boar since he can't finish it alone, so that night a massive feast is held in his honor. While everyone else is having fun, Banga brings the valuable leftovers from the boar to Takumi and tells him he can sell them for money if he heads to the nearest city, Bolton, so that will be Takumi's next destination. All the while, Goddess Nolan has been watching over him, and she's really happy with how well he is progressing. One of her fellow goddesses asks her what she's hoping to achieve by giving Takumi such special treatment. She gave him a special body, a special blessing, and on top of that, she can send him a whole year into the past, before Sidonia actually activated the summoning spell that brought him here, but Nolan says she doesn't have a particular reason for it, she's just doing what she thinks is right. One morning, Takumi finds himself tied up in bed, and he already knows Maple was the one behind it. Maple apologizes, but Takumi has been so busy lately that she felt really lonely and just wanted to get his attention. Takumi realizes he has been so focused on his work that he barely spends any time with Maple, so he decides to take a break from work for the day and play with Maple, which makes her really happy. Just then, Martha walks in to bring Takumi some lunch. It looks like something weird is going on between Takumi and Maple, but Takumi assures her that it's not what she thinks. Martha takes his word for it, but she can't help but notice that the silk Maple produced looks really nice, so she plans to milk Maple dry of as much silk as she can make. Later that day, Martha has successfully created a spider silk shirt, and all the ladies in the village are in love with the texture of the fabric. Takumi hadn't realized spider silk was such a hot commodity, so the ladies explain that spider silk is a luxury item, so only nobles ever get to buy it. Martha asks Maple if she could make some more fabric for her, so Maple starts squirting it out, but this is going to take a while, so she isn't going to get to play with Takumi anymore. Takumi is a little disappointed since he was looking forward to spending time with Maple for once, but he's still got things to do anyway, so he's not too bothered. It has been roughly a month since Takumi first came to this village, and he intends to head to the city soon to study his alchemy, but he can't bring himself to say goodbye to all the villagers after spending so much time with them. Takumi then goes to meet with Boron at the forge so he can continue his blacksmithing practice, and before long, they've made a chest plate that fits Takumi perfectly, as well as some steel toe boots. Boron tells him that the boots will be useful if he ever needs to kick anything, but Takumi doesn't intend to do any fighting since he just wants to be an alchemist. Just then, Bangma shows up, and he's glad to see that Takumi's armor is finally complete, but he's going to miss him once he's gone. He knows Takumi can't stay here forever if he wants to expand his production business, so it's the logical move for him to head to the city where he can sell more of his goods and get a reliable supply of materials. A trader from Bolton is going to come to this village in a couple of days, so Bangma arranged for Takumi to ride with him on his way back to Bolton. They are sad to see him go, but they know this is for the best, so they tell Takumi to start getting his stuff ready. Takumi thanks them for all their help and starts heading back to his house so he can pack up, but along the way he runs into Martha while she's carrying a bucket of meat. He asks her what she's up to, so Martha explains that she's on her way to throw away the innards of a horned rabbit that Bangma caught. Apparently, the innards are the most delicious part of the rabbit, but they need to be processed thoroughly to remove all diseases and parasites. This village doesn't have the equipment necessary to do that, so she has to throw the meat away so no one gets sick. However, Takumi tells her that won't be necessary since he can just purify the meat. He bends down and uses purification magic, so the meat in the bucket should be safe to eat now. But while Martha is indeed thankful, she is equally stunned that Takumi can use light magic. She tells him that he probably shouldn't reveal that he can use light magic when he leaves this village because there are very few people in this world who are capable of that, so if people found out he could use it, it would draw a lot of unwanted attention. Takumi takes note of her warning and promises to be careful about revealing his power, but in the meantime, while he's still in the village, he plans to use every bit of his power to make their lives better. He uses earth magic to build up a brick wall for the village's safety, and for convenience, he builds them a water pump as well as a couple of other amenities. By the time he is done, this place looks like a whole new village, so when the merchant arrives, he barely recognizes it. Banga comes out to greet Papek, and after completing their trade deal, Takumi walks up so they can start going. Papek has already heard a lot about Takumi from Banga, so he introduces himself and everyone asks if Takumi has all his stuff ready. Takumi assures them he hasn't forgotten anything, but there is one thing he wants to give them though. He pulls out one of his potions from his bag and gives it to Banga. He already dropped off about 100 of these bottles at Banga's house, so in the event of a disaster, he wants Banga to use these to heal any injuries. Papek is left in shock after seeing the potion Takumi made, so he asks to take a closer look, and it is definitely a high-level potion, although Takumi doesn't seem to realize it. The rest of the villagers soon show up to bid Takumi farewell, so Papek says he will wait for them to finish their goodbyes before he leaves. Molly says goodbye to Maple, who's sleeping in Takumi's sack, and Martha hands him an outfit she and the other ladies made for him out of Maple's silk. Takumi is really grateful for their thoughtful gift and thanks everyone once more for being so kind to him, even though they haven't known him long. He then gets in the carriage and all the villagers give him a huge send-off, telling him he will always be welcome in their village. As Papek and Takumi head for Bolton, Papek mentions that the people of that village seem to really love him. Even the others in the carriage can tell that Takumi was practically family to them, and such a goodbye really tugs at Heath's heartstrings. By the way, these guys are heading for Bolton as well, so the blonde guy introduces himself as Heath, the redhead is Rail, and the gloomy-looking guy over there is named Booger. They are all part of a C-rank party named Lion Fang, and they are currently acting as Papek's bodyguards. Although this region is pretty peaceful, so there isn't actually much for them to do. Rail notices that Takumi is holding onto his bag really tightly, so they ask him if something precious is inside, and Takumi answers, saying his pet killer spider is sleeping inside. The group can't believe Takumi managed to tame a killer spider, so Rail asks to see it, but he's being really creepy about it, so Maple ends up headbutting him in the face. Takumi begins apologizing profusely for what Maple did, but the others tell him there's nothing to be sorry about since Rail deserved it. In fact, Heath wouldn't be surprised if Maple's encounter with Rail makes her fear all humans from now on, but that doesn't seem to be the case since she seems to have taken a liking to Bogar. While everyone starts fawning over Maple, Papek calls Takumi to the front because he wants to talk about the potion he saw Takumi holding earlier. He asks if there are any more of those in stock, because if so, he would love to buy some. Takumi doesn't really mind selling Papek the potions, but all of a sudden, the horse stops and it looks like there's trouble afoot. There is a horde of goblins surrounding the carriage for an attack, which is really bad news, but the others seem pretty excited since this means they finally get to do something, so they tell Takumi and Papek to sit back and let them do all the work as they step out onto the field. There are roughly 20 goblins out in the field, so they are pretty confident they can handle this and start fighting. Rail shoots them down with his bow, while Bogar and Heath attack the rest with their mace and axe. Overall, it doesn't take long for them to wipe out all the goblins, so once they are done, they get to work dissecting the goblins so they can collect the magic stones. And from what Maple has seen so far, she really likes Bogar. She hates Rail, and she doesn't really care about Heath. Shortly after, everyone got back on the carriage and their journey continued for the next 3 days until they finally arrived in Bolton. Once they enter the city, the members of Lion Fang head to the Adventurers Guild to report the success of their bodyguard mission, and Takumi follows them there since he needs to register with the guild to stay in this city. He would have preferred to register with the Alchemist Guild, but there isn't one here, so he's going to have to become an adventurer instead. The receptionist Hans tells Takumi that he can just use the Adventurer Guild card as his identification, and as long as he does a simple quest once every month, it won't expire at all. Takumi ends up registering as an adventurer and also presents Maple as his pet. After all the registrations are complete, Takumi heads to Papek's trading company to work on a deal for the potions. He has roughly 103 different potions in stock, and all of them are of extremely high quality, so Papek is prepared to pay 10 silver coins for each healing and stamina potion and 50 silver coins for each mana potion. Takumi does some quick math in his head and realizes that he would make over 7 million yen from this single deal. He thinks that's way too much money, but on the contrary, Papek informs him that he could have made a lot more money if he already had a reputation as a producer. On that note, since Takumi intends to become a producer in this city, Papek recommends that he get a house with a workshop attached for convenience reasons, but Takumi hadn't even thought about where he would be living once he got here. Papek decides to help him out a little and calls for his assistant Thomas so he can show Takumi a good property with an affordable rate. However, when Takumi finally sees the house, it looks way more like a mansion, so he doesn't think he can afford it. Thomas assures him that the mansion is quite affordable, and he can guarantee that there are no ghosts here, so he won't have to worry about that. Takumi spots the workshop connected to the house, and he starts considering the purchase since this place would be really accommodating for his work. And he can afford to pay for it, since he got a lot of money from selling those potions to Papek. After a little deliberation, he eventually decides to pay for the mansion, so he tells Thomas he'll take it. Thomas is glad to hear that and says he will get started on the paperwork immediately, so Takumi can move in tomorrow if he wants, but as they are walking through the city streets, Takumi smells something foul in the air. Thomas can tell that the smell is bothering Takumi, so he explains that the foul stench is coming from the sewers. Rich people have magical purifiers to cleanse their sewage, but the main city sewers have no such luxury. Magic purifiers are really rare since they are only found in ancient ruins and dungeons, so they are too expensive to implement in the city sewers. Some priests are periodically hired to manually cleanse the sewers with purification magic, but the sewers are still filthy most of the time. The next day, Takumi and Maple move into their new house, and the first thing Takuma wants to do is find a solution to the sewer problem. He gets a piece of quartz and clay from Papek's company, and after using magic to shape it, he uses fire magic combined with space-time magic to bake it quickly. After doing that for a while, Takumi's mana was completely drained, so he had to drink a couple of mana potions, but on the bright side, he did manage to complete his creation. A modern toilet. Just then, he hears Papek screaming from his living room, so he comes out to check what's going on and finds Papek wrapped head to toe in Maple's silk. Takumi asks Maple why she would do such a thing, but she thought Papek would find this to be fun. In her defense, the comforting feel of her silk does put Papek to sleep, but that doesn't make it right, so Takumi sincerely apologizes for Maple's actions. Papek tells Takumi it's alright, but getting swaddled so suddenly, it'd scare him a little, so he needs to use Takumi's restroom real quick. However, as soon as he enters, he comes back out and starts asking what this marvel of technology is. Takumi comes over and explains that this thing is a toilet. He attached it to a magical purification device so it automatically cleans itself once you're done with your business. Basically, after you take a dump, it uses purification magic to break down your shit into inorganic materials, and then that gets flushed down the drain. The system makes sense to Papek, but the only way someone could possibly have made such a thing would be if you had an aptitude for light magic. Takumi realizes he may have messed up since Martha clearly warned him against using his light magic openly, so he asks Papek to please keep this a secret for him. Papek understands why Takumi would want to keep his abilities a secret, so he promises not to tell anyone, but he absolutely must have some of these toilets, so he asks Takumi if he can make 100 of them for him. Takumi is hesitant to agree since making just one toilet was a lot of work, but since Papek is being so insistent, he agrees to do it as long as Papek can provide the raw materials. Papek is really happy to hear that, but he can't expect Takumi to make all those toilets by himself, so he suggests that Takumi should make a slave contract. Takumi is taken aback by the suggestion since he would never want to get a slave, but Papek points out that if Takumi is trying to keep his abilities a secret, then it would be best to get a slave to help with his work since a slave would be bound to secrecy. Having aptitude for light magic is a really good big deal since it means you were chosen by God, and as such, the Church of Divine Light would probably come after Takumi to force him to work for them. They make a lot of profit by monopolizing purification magic, so Papek doubts they would be happy to learn that commoners can have access to cheap purifications through Takumi's toilets. But Papek already has an idea of how to get around the church, so Takumi doesn't need to worry about it for now. The most important thing is making sure that the church doesn't find out about his light magic. That's why getting a slave would be the best option for him. But Takumi is strictly against slavery, so he says he will just do all the work by himself. Just then, his guild card begins glowing, so Takumi takes a look at it, and it displays a message saying he needs to complete a verification quest to maintain his status as an adventurer, so it looks like he won't have time to make the toilets by himself after all, so he caves and agrees to buy a slave. Papek takes Takumi to the Mulan Trading Company since they are the most ethical slave traders around. Papek goes off to talk with the owner so he can get Takumi a good deal, and in the meantime, Takumi heads out into the garden because it looks pretty. There he finds a beautiful elf girl sitting on a terrace, but the second she sees Takumi, she tells him to get out of here. This was the end of episode 2. Subscribe to not miss the next part.